Please join us in welcoming back to Mōʻī our speaker, Dr. Ronald Williams.
My things. Aloha mai kākou. E malahini wau, I ke ia wahi o Lāhainā, I ka moko puni o Maui, I ko Hawaii pai aina, no laila, ua ho'omaka wau me ko ku'u Mōʻī Kauikeaouli. I'm going to start with my genealogy, as my kumu taught me. So I'm Ron Williams Jr. There's a Ron Williams Sr., my dad. He lives in Arkansas. He comes from a long line of farmers, fishermen, hunters in Arkansas. My mother is Janet Marie LaBounty. Her people come from Chicago, which is where I was born. And then before that, back through Montreal, and before that, France and Ireland, which I'm wearing my St. Patrick's Day socks today, so we're good. It's not just Kauikeaouli Day. Okay, so I come from a background of Irish, of English, of French, and of farmers from Arkansas. My academic Mōʻī Kauikeaouli is a little more complicated. I went to college in 1984 at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. By the way, we were national champions in football that year. Not many people can say that. And I was there for a year and a half, and I took about 16 classes, I think, and I passed one of them. And the school and I both agreed I should try something else. And so I went home, and I came out to Maui in 1997. Actually, New Year's Day, 1997, is when I arrived in Maui. I had the very, very fortunate happening of meeting my first kumu, and that was a Koniakana. For some reason, he picked me out and took me under his wing, gave me a word or two every day, gave me a little bit of stuff to follow, and eventually I was working for him on those Maui Nei tours and getting more and more interested. Now, when I arrived here, I knew that I was visiting somebody else's place. That was obvious to me, and I was interested. But what he did is kind of slow me down and to have me start to begin to understand the tip of that kuleana. Yeah? My daughter was 3 years old at the time. I was working at the Feast at Lele. I was one of the waiters there at the Feast at Lele, having a blast. Wearing lava lava, watching the sunset every night, making good money, eating poi, pohole fern. And it hit me one day that I couldn't work at the luau forever, because no one wants to see a 60-year-old with his shirt off. So I decided to go back to school. And so I went to Maui Community College, and that's where I had my second great fortune, and that was to meet my kumu, Keopi Raymond. Keopi was my kumu in Hawaiian Studies 107 and Hawaiian language. And he showed a film in class one day that changed my life, quite literally. And that was a film that I watched of the most passionate, fierce, amazing person I'd ever met in my life, and that was Dr. Haunani K. Trask. Dr. Trask lit a fire in me, and I said, not knowing any better, being naive, I said, well, I want to go study under her. And so the Rainbow Bridge program that brought us out to University of Hawaii, I took that and went out to Kamakakuakalani. I was welcomed with open arms by Mehana Hind, who was the counselor at the time, and she kind of pulled me aside. There was a group of folks and me, and she said, if you choose to come here to Kamakakuakalani, then this is your home too. And so I was welcomed there at Kamakaku. I brought my daughter with me. I was a single dad at the time, and I got my bachelor's degree in 2005 in Hawaiian Studies. I got my master's degree in Pacific Island Studies in 2008, and I got my PhD in Hawaiian History in 2013. Now, the thing that I think is important to note about that PhD, not mine, but the PhD in general, is they just started that program about 6 years ago. And think about that tonight when we talk about place and so forth. For 100 years, the University of Hawaii existed without a PhD in Hawaiian history. You could get a PhD in Pacific history and focus on Hawaii, but it was Pacific history. You could get a PhD in Korean history, in Southeast Asian history, in French history, in American history. But they just started a program that's a PhD in Hawaiian history. There's two professors, Dr. Arista and Dr. Rosa, that run that program now. And so now students are starting to filter into that program, focusing on Hawaii. Yeah? So that's my academic Mōʻī Kauikeaouli, my academic genealogy. I also want to thank a few folks to start off. Number one, the folks at Lāhainā Restoration Foundation that not only planned and thought this up, but pulled it off. This is pretty amazing, what's happened here tonight, and so I thank them. Anohea read a quote about justice and things like that. that's why I'm here. I've been giving talks for quite a while now, and I've worked on my PhD and talked about my PhD for quite a few times. And what I've realized is it's not about winning anything. It's not about convincing you of anything. It's about putting forth the voices of the kupuna, the voices of the past, so that you can know more about yourself and your people and other people, so that we can all start to build towards a future that we all know, right? Because quite honestly, we know very little, including myself. I'm going to talk tonight about a couple of topics. The major topic is Kauikeaouli. But I don't do any talks nowadays without starting with historiography. Yeah? Historiography is just the fancy term for the creation of history, the process, yeah? There's history books. I've got a couple here. This is a history book. The way this person came up with their history is their historiography. Yeah? Who they talk to. Now, every history book ever written in history is exclusive. It can't include everyone. You're going to do a history book on World War II? You're going to talk to 40 million people? Of course not. You know? You're going to talk to some people, and those choices that you make create your historiography. Now, you might try as hard as you can to be inclusive, and that's a good thing. But it's still a little bit exclusive. Sometimes people are purposefully exclusive. That's the case for Hawaiian history. We all know the contested history. We all know the facts, basic facts about what has happened here. Dr. Trask used to say it's been done 1,000 times. They perfected it by now. The first thing you do is get rid of a people's language. And that was done. And the history that we have about Hawaii today, even folks, good folks that are putting out histories today, come from a process, a foundation that was eternally scarred and messed up, yeah? And that's what I'm going to talk about first, and then we'll get into actually the facts of Kauikeaouli, okay? The other thing besides Mo'okuahau that I've always been trained to talk about, to start with, is place, yeah? This place that we're at, King Kamehameha III School, is quite appropriate. I gave a talk yesterday at the state capitol. Yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the state capitol building. And I gave a talk on ancient capital. So we talked about Moku'ula and Lahaina. And it was wonderful, but it felt kind of odd. I'm like, I should be in Lahaina talking about Lahaina. But so, thank goodness that you guys invited me here, and I'm honored to be here. But let's talk a little bit about this place that we're at right here. It post-dates Kauikeaouli by a little bit, the story I'm going to tell you, but it's just because he started this process, and that was the creation of a school, right, just on the other side of us here. And that school was called Kulu'ehu. Yeah? And I'm going to show you a photograph right here. Okay, and so if you look right there, that's Lua'ehu School, right? There's Canal Street, there's Front Street, yeah? Lua'ehu School. So what was Lua'ehu? Lua'ehu, besides being the place name for the Constitution and so forth, was a school started by Alexander Liholiho and Queen Emma. Yeah? Now, the school was very, very purposeful. Most of you know the fact that Queen Emma brought the Anglican Church to Hawaii. And that was a contestation of the American mission. Yeah? American mission had the school up on the hill, Lahaina Luna. It had been 20 or 30 years. Some of the elite didn't like the way they were kind of pushing themselves into certain areas and making demands and so forth. So Queen Emma, who was part British, and her husband started looking for maybe there's another answer. So the Anglican Church came to Hawaii. And as soon as they arrived, the Queen insisted that they incorporate. And they did. We have those incorporation papers at the State Archives. They incorporated as the Reformed Catholic Church. And it was in 1862. And so they start this church, and the Queen says, because you've incorporated, I can give you land and property and money. And she did. And they started a school. Now, we all know about the school over in Oahu, but it actually all started here in Lahaina. The first school built, the Anglican school built, was on these premises, and it was called Lua'ehu. And it was a direct contestation of Lahaina Luna. In fact, in the Board of Education reports, it's named Lahaina Lalo. Yeah? So Lahaina Luna, Lahaina Lalo. And something super interesting, the Queen insisted, now they were doing the same thing that was being done up at Lahaina Luna. They were educating the future native leaders of Hawaii. Yeah? Curtis Iauakea went here. William Punahu Aveoveo Ulukalani White went here. Yeah? Future leaders of Hawaii are being trained in geometry and math and science and all these things at Lua'ehu School, and she insisted that they be taught in English. Now, it's hard to, sometimes we have this impulse that, well, English good, bad, Hawaiian good, and so forth. But remember that in 1862, no one thought the language was going away. To learn English meant that you were bilingual. Bilingual, which meant that you were at least equal. Now, up at Lahaina, they're teaching them in Hawaiian, but they're graduating with a single language, some of them. Some of them were bilingual. But she insisted, I want these students to be fluent in Hawaiian, fluent in English, and have all the schooling that Lahaina is getting. And that school, Lua'ehu, existed on this premises. Right? So it was a contestation of the Protestant mission that came out of Kauikeaouli's push for a literate nation. Right? They started to develop. So that's the place we're at today. Okay? Now let's start off by looking at some images. So I thought it might be, now those of you who know me know that I can get kind of zealous in my research. So I've got material to keep you here till morning. But I'm not going to do that. But I do want to show you, I thought it might be fun or interesting to go through the images of Kauikeaouli that we have and tell you where they're from and who has them and those types of things. 10 minutes, so let's do that. Okay, so let's start off with this one. Okay, now this well-known painting is by Robert Dampier. This was a painting that was the side painting of the Nahiena painting. It was when the ship arrived, bringing back the bodies of Kamehameha II, right, and his wife. It's held at the Honolulu Museum of Art, and I want to. This is being taped, isn't it? Crud. But who cares? So you know what? And I should preface this by saying, I joke around, but I do want to say something because it is important. It is important to get these facts right, and we've had time enough to we've all heard that we should be doing our research and so forth. So I'll tell the story. Honolulu Museum of Art holds this painting and the other one. They had them in the Holt galleries for a decade or so. I went up there about 10 years ago, and I'm going up to I wanted to check out the originals. And I go up, and they have the Kauikeaouli, and underneath they have the card that tells you all about him, and it says, Kauikeaouli, Kamehameha III, son of Kamehameha II. And I'm like, and with all due respect, that's something you could have found on Wikipedia, right? Or make a call or something. And I mention that because it speaks to the comfort that folks have with guessing about Hawaiian history. Yeah? I'm going to show you some other stuff in a few minutes, but that's how normalized it has become to do research in English, to assume that, call somebody at the university and they know or something, right? The facts are all there, but we're taking the lazy way out. Now, back to the painting. Kauikeaouli, he was 11 years old at the time. He becomes Mōʻī at that time, but yet with a kind of asterisk, because he is 11, he's not of age yet. The person with the power really is Ka'ahumanu at that time, who is the Kuhina Nui. This painting was made of him, and it's an oil on canvas, 20 by 24, Honolulu Museum of Art. It was given to that museum by the Cook family. Okay? Ooh, I've got a clicker I can use. This is a painting that the Hawaii State Archives has. It is of Kauikeaouli in a Prussian army uniform that he was gifted. Yeah? And it's circa 1831, oil on canvas, 36 by 28 inches. And again, it is at the Hawaii State Archives. Interesting fact, many of the artifacts that are held by folks like the palace and so forth are actually property of the state archives. I say state archives, it's really a public archives, right? It comes from the kingdom era. But this is state archives material. This painting was actually discovered about 10, 12 years ago. Not a lot of images of Nahiena and Kauikeaouli, but this one was discovered in Australia. A private owner had it, didn't really know about it, didn't know much about it. David Forbes and some other folks had come across it, told him what it was. There were 5 paintings of Ali'i, and 3 of them were bought by Bishop Museum, 2 of them were bought by the Honolulu Museum of Art. So they are split up. But this one of Kauikeaouli is at the Bishop Museum. And it was in 1836 when a French ship came to Hawaii, and the painter painted Kauikeaouli. Okay, this is a colored pencil watercolor and ink drawing, 6 by 8 inches. This one's held by the Smithsonian. Yeah? He was the artist aboard the U.S. Navy exploring expedition, the Wilkes expedition, when it came to Hawaii. So you have that, and you also have a rough draft of it here, right? Another 6 by 8 inch painting, or drawing. Then we get into the photography, daguerreotypes. Now daguerreotypes there's one of each, right? There's no negative, so you're making a photograph and that's it. Sometimes they would take 2 or 3 in a row, so they look kind of similar. This was an unknown photographer. It's Kamehameha III and Queen Kalama, and that's a actually photograph. Yeah? This daguerreotype that's kind of semi-famous is held by the Bishop Museum. The Kamehameha royal family, Hugo Stregenwald, again, Bishop Museum. This was fascinating. This I found upstairs at the Hawaii State Archives. This is a bracelet, a gold bracelet with a diamond inlay that is a daguerreotype of the royal family once again. It's the same image you saw before, but a different, it might have been taken 5 seconds later or whatever, but it's the same type of image, and it's inside that locket. It's believed to be the bracelet of Queen Emma. I'm sorry, Princess Ruth. Princess Ruth. Yeah? And then finally, I think this daguerreotype of Kauikeaouli from Staggenwald again. This is circa 1853, so this would have been the year before he passed. And then this one, which is privately owned, is circa 1853 also. So those are the major images that we have of Kauikeaouli. The statue that went up, I thought it was interesting, the statue that went up in Thomas Square Park recently. Some of my dear friends who kind of look for things to criticize, didn't like the statue because it didn't look like him, they said. I was like, well, you think the Kamehameha I statue looks like him? So there's, at least we have photographs now of Kauikeaouli. We can look at it. Okay, so let's look into the talk. So I want to start off, okay. I want to start off with that issue of historiography. Now, there's master narratives about everybody and every place, right? If they're semi-famous. We all carry those master narratives. I promise you. They are within all of our heads. If I forced you, I'm going to pick on you. If I forced you to tell me about, so tell me a couple of things about the Congo in Africa. You have to. I have a gun to your head saying you have to say something. What do you know? What are you going to tell me about the Congo?
Tarzan.
Tarzan. What does it look like?
Waterfalls, jungle.
Okay. Barren, lots of people, mountains.
Mountains.
Okay. Okay. So now thank you so much. But my point is, we all carry narratives about places we probably have never been. You've never been to the Congo? Okay. If somebody forced me to talk about Australia and said, you've got to do it and pretend like you know, I'd talk for half an hour about Australia. Because I've read stuff, and I've seen stuff on TV, and I've seen after-school specials and so forth and so forth. Those are the master narratives. How those master narratives are created is vitally important. Okay? The master narrative for Hawaii, 95% of what you've ever read about Hawaii has come from English language sources. Now that doesn't mean every bit was a lie, but it means that everything you know about Hawaii from that 95% comes from ship captains, businessmen, ship captains' wives, missionaries' wives, and so forth. Hawaiians spoke and wrote prolifically. One of the most literate nations in the world produced one of the largest archives of indigenous writing in the world. We have 125,000 pages of Hawaiian language newspapers. And everyone focuses on the newspapers, and that's great, I'm glad, that's awesome. But people forget, we've got tens of thousands of Hawaiian language letters, correspondences, from the Ali'i back and forth, from the Maka'ainana to the Ali'i. We've got petitions, we've got bills, we've got laws, we've got government documents. I'm going through stuff at the archives recently. The sheriffs, when they're writing in what's going on in 1892, 93, 94, they're writing Maka'olelo Hawaii. Yeah? Because the head attorney general spoke both English and Hawaiian. So we have these documents, a prolific archive of Hawaiian language documents that was put away and set over there. And they wrote Hawaiian history from this. I'm going to give you an analogy. Say we're creating a history of America, the United States. And it's going to be the history book, the main history book about America. And so we want to get the best historian out there, so we hire the best historian in the world. He's this Italian guy, very famous. He goes to Oxford, and we say, we've come write the history of America. And he says, okay, I'm good at what I do, I can do this. So he comes to the National Archives, and in the National Archives there are 5 billion documents. And he comes up to the front desk, he doesn't speak English, he speaks Italian. So he comes up to the front desk and he says to the lady, she has an interpreter, and he says, give me everything you've got in there that's written in Italian. Right? And the Italian Americans who were living in America had written, and so he goes in that $5 billion document warehouse, and they pull out 5,000 documents and they hand them to him. And he walks out and he sits down and he spends 10 years and he writes the history of America. And that becomes a book, that becomes a textbook, that becomes a history book, that becomes a movie, that becomes an after-school special, that becomes you talking to your friend at the water cooler, and that becomes American history. That's what's happened in Hawaii. That's what's happened in Hawaii. The native voices were shut out. All the prolific stuff that we know about Hawaii has come from those singular 5 or 6% of the population. Yeah? I'm going to show you why that's important. I usually do this by slideshow, but I've got plenty of pictures tonight, so I'm going to just talk story about this. In 1893, there was an overthrow, right? A coup. The queen was overthrown. Now, give it a little bit of back context. You have a small group of men, white men, who had gathered together to overthrow the native monarchy and take over. And they didn't want to take over to rule Hawaii. They wanted to be annexed to the United States immediately. That was the plan all along. And so they didn't think they'd have to worry about much. We'll just do this and get annexed. But there's a problem because there's a pause and so forth and so forth. So they have to make an argument for why they've just done this. Now, as much as we like to generalize everybody, including America, there was a very strong anti-imperialism movement going on in America. There were many folks in America who thought this wasn't a just thing to do. I wrote an article for the Hawaiian Journal of History that talks about collegiate debates over annexation in the US. In 1893 and 1894, and I found this in the Hawaiian language newspaper, they were talking about a debate at Georgetown about Hawaiian annexation, and the no side won. So I started following other universities across the country, and I found 7 different debates in 1893 and 1894 where the collegiate teams debated annexation. In every case, the no side won, for 2 reasons. Actually, so it was Harvard, Yale, Georgetown, Columbia. The other one that I thought was interesting was Stanford, UC schools. Stanford was 1 year old, and the UC schools were Hastings Law School and Berkeley. And they debated, should we annex Hawaii? One argument was racist. We don't want 100,000 brown people coming into our country as citizens. But the other argument was, it's not just. It's not right. Yeah? We're of the people, by the people, and for the people. How can you make an argument that a population of 2,000 or 3,000 white folks should run a country of 115,000 people? So they're kind of stuck. What argument do we make? Now, in 1863, the ABC-FM in Boston had declared Hawaii a Christian nation. And they said they are a Christian, civilized, intelligent people. In 1863. Now, 40 years later, those sons and grandsons of the mission have to make a different argument. If they're intelligent and civilized and Christian, then why are we running the country and not them? So the thing they come up with is that old argument about race and civilization and da-da-da and da-da-da. And they start to wipe out that past 50 years of accomplishment in the kingdom and write a new history. In 1893, and 2 weeks after the overthrow, they get William DeWitt Alexander to write a pamphlet about the overthrow, this thing that has just happened. Because they got to make up some kind of story. And so he writes this pamphlet called The Overthrow, and they sell it from the Pacific Commercial Advertiser. Later on, you know that there was no annexation in 93, the Republic was declared, so forth, and pause. Now a push for annexation comes up again in 1898. Because of the Spanish-American War, America takes Hawaii and so forth. Now, how do we cover our tracks? How do we make sure that what we did looks good to folks in the US? And so that pamphlet turns into a book. And that book is right here. This is A Brief History of the Hawaiian People by W.D. Alexander, William DeWitt Alexander. Not only was he the most prominent haole historian of the time, but he was the president of the Board of Education. This book is a horrible book. If you read through it, it's racist, Hawaiians aren't really human, they can't run the place, and blah, 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 blah. Horrible. But I want to read you one kind of the most egregious part of it. And I apologize for, some of this stuff is very kalaha, yeah? But I do believe we have to know where we got the stuff we have to be able to get rid of it. So here's what W.D. Alexander writes in his book about infanticide. Infanticide is the killing of your own children, right? Dr. Stannard and others have disproven that myth of widespread infanticide. Nonetheless, William DeWitt Alexander writes here on page 33, infanticide. Infanticide was fearfully prevalent, and there were few of the older women at the date of the abolition of idolatry who had not been guilty of it. It was the opinion of those best informed that 2/3 of all children born in Hawaii were destroyed in infancy by their parents. They were generally buried alive, in many cases in the very houses occupied by their unnatural parents. The principal reason given for it was laziness, unwillingness to take the trouble of rearing children. So William DeWitt Alexander says that 2/3 of Native Hawaiian children were buried alive in the front yard because parents didn't want to raise them. Right? Now we know that's ridiculous. We know that's awful and racist and so forth. But he's been dead 200 years, who cares? I care because this book became the territorial textbook for all schools in Hawaii for 40 years. This was the book used in every public and private school in the territory of Hawaii from 1899 to 1939. So you wonder why your grandfather, great-grandfather, great-grandmother got a different story. This is what it said, right? They were raised for 2 or 3 generations saying, this is your ancestors, right? That's why it's important. Now, I did my MA on history of Hawaii and historiography and stuff, and one of my committee members said, well, yeah, that's great, but that's old stuff. That doesn't happen anymore. It does happen. It happens constantly. Here's a book that came out about 5 years ago. The president of the University of Hawaii decided he wanted a history of the university. So he tasked each department to write a history of their department. Most of the departments ignored him, like they usually do. But Tropical Ag took it up in style because that's where we came from. We all came from, it was a tropical agriculture school that became the University of Hawaii, that became Manoa. So they said, oh great, we get to show off. So they put out this coffee table book, this huge, beautiful, very expensive coffee table book about the history of UH, all started with Tropical Ag, okay? And so I got it, I'm like, I just found this a couple years ago and I'm reading it and I read through and I kind of need a little help. George, you can help me. I need you to read one sentence, okay? Hold this, please. Hold the mic. Read this sentence that starts with.
No, I don't want. I don't want.
Oh, you don't have your glasses. Who wants to read for me? Do you read, sir? Okay. So read this one sentence, nice and loud, starting with on, just one sentence.
Okay, just need some light.
Okay. Starting on. Yeah.
Hang on.
Huh?
Let's do this the right way.
It'll be worth it, I promise. Okay, there we go.
Sorry, it's dark in here.
Okay, so right there, which is on.
Point again, I don't see it.
Right there.
Okay. On January 4th, 1893, the Hawaii Bureau, later the Board of Agriculture and Forestry, was established in the Republic of Hawaii. Also established in 1893, in parentheses.
Okay. So, again, on January 4th, 1893, the Bureau of Tropical Agriculture and Forestry was started in the Republic of Hawaii. Why are you laughing? Huh? The Republic didn't exist until 1894. January 4th, 1893 was 2 weeks before the overthrow. A Maui senator in the Kingdom Legislature in 1991 pushed a bill to create a Tropical Agriculture Bureau to eventually turn into a college. On January 4th, 1893, 2 weeks before the overthrow, the Queen signed that bill and it became law. And in 2005, you have the University of Hawaii publishing a book saying, no, 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 it was the group of white men who took over who founded our university. Now, this is a UH Press book with 2 different editors that went through it. Now, I don't think they, maybe, I don't think they did it purposely. I think it speaks to that idea of this normalization that, of course, the guys who did the overthrow started the university. Of course, that's where education came from. That's where intellect came from. But again, with all due respect, I never go there, but you could go to Wikipedia and find out that's wrong, right? That speaks to the normalization of people making up history without even at the university. So it's not a problem that's 150 years old. It's a problem that's 5 years old, that's today old, yeah? These histories continue to be created and continue to be created without that primary source research. Okay? So that's the bad news. Let's talk about the good news. The good news is things are changing. There's a whole generation of students. My daughter went to immersion for 10 years. She started at Nahiana, immersion up in Nahiana. And she blows me away. She corrects my Hawaiian all the time. So folks like her and others that will read through these papers and read through these documents and start to put out history are changing those things, are challenging those other histories. Yeah? So that's what we're going to talk about tonight when we talk about Kauikeaouli. And before I get into Kauikeaouli, I want to kind of give you a feeling for how big the general narrative is messed up. Now, much of the stuff I'm going to talk about is new research that redefines most of what we know about Kauikeaouli. I was taught in 2001 at Maui Community College. I had History 284 was Hawaiian history, and the textbook was Gavin Dawes' The Shoal of Time. And I was taught that Kauikeaouli was a drunk, that he partied, that he kind of wasted the kingdom away. They could never get him to do anything. You know, he had to roust him out of bed, and he just didn't really do anything. He was just around for a long time, right? And he was heathen, he did all these crazy things and so forth. That's what I was taught about Kauikeaouli. The true story is quite different. The true story is Kauikeaouli crafted a nation that saved his people for over 50 years. Now, many scholars, including Dr. Beamer and others, have started to show us that this narrative of the fact, it all started back with a book called Fatal Impact. A Pacific history scholar wrote a book called Fatal Impact. He said, well, basically the story is white folks went throughout the Pacific and native folks fell to the wayside, right? Not what happened. Hawaiians had agency, had power. Those 13 or 14 folks in Honolulu weren't running everything, right? My dissertation looks at the church, and that's a different topic. But what we're coming to understand is that Kauikeaouli brilliantly set a plan to save the nation and achieved it beyond all odds, right? I was taught that the missionaries imposed a Western style of government on Hawaii, and therefore everything was lost. Now think about that. In the 1830s, 1840s, the Pacific was being gobbled up by European powers. The Spanish had already taken the Marquesas. The French were looking at French Polynesia. Germans were looking at Samoa, right? Hawaii couldn't defend itself against navies in the world, of course not. And Hawaii was strategically probably the most important place, right in the center of the Pacific. The only chance to save Hawaii's independence was to gain recognition as an equal. It's a crazy, crazy story, no way. I mean, why would countries recognize Hawaii, this tiny little place Hawaii, as an equal? But it's the only chance he had. So he, and as a world historian, world history is one of my topics, as a world historian I can tell you, I don't know of another situation where an absolute monarch, a divine monarch, voluntarily gives up significant amounts of his power for his people to save the nation. He didn't have to do that. When prior to the 1840 Constitution, Kauikeaouli was the ruler. He was divine. The 1840 Constitution created three separate parts of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Now, it wasn't wholly separate because he was parts of the other two also, but the 1852 Constitution completely separated it. So he twice voluntarily gives up power. Why? Not because he was tricked into it by William Richards or anyone else, because he was smart enough to know that's the only way we're going to gain recognition, and it's a shot. So he does that. Later, I'm going to talk about the fact that the mission that went out around the world to gain recognition was successful. On November 28th, La Kūkulu, we celebrate the English and the French celebrating that equal status. Hawaii was welcomed into the family of nations, right? And that kept Hawaii safe for 50 years. Yeah? Now, what happened in 1893 was a violation of international law, of treaties, and of all those things. But those are the things, that recognition that Kauikeaouli gained was what saved Hawaii for the half a century. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before I do, and I promise I'm getting into it in a second, but before I do, I want to kind of share with you a narrative of identity. You know, we've talked about identity and how we see ourselves and so forth. Besides Kauikeaouli, I want you to know a couple of things about the kingdom. I work really, really hard at not, people who are on my Facebook page know because I always kick them off. I work really, really hard at saying, here's primary sources of history, you go play with it and argue about it and stuff like that. I'm not a political scientist, I'm a historian, right? And I take that very seriously. So when I say these things to you that I'm about to say, I want you to understand they're coming from me not as a way to get you to believe something, but a way just to share those facts. The Kingdom of Hawaii in the 19th century was one of the most progressive, modern, just nations in the world. That's without question. Now listen to these facts. Those of you who can and want to, I encourage you to close your eyes. You don't have to. When you do, because I want you to hear these things, because these aren't the things you've heard from books for the last 50 years. In 1840, Kauikeaouli voluntarily gave up 2/3 of his power to save his nation's independence. In 1843, England and France declare Hawaii a sovereign and equal co-nation into the family of nations. No other European-born nation in the world had achieved that. Hawaii was first. Yeah? In 1852, Kauikeaouli and the other ali'i write a constitution that offers universal manhood suffrage. Yeah? Yorokapuna created a nation, a constitution, that said, we don't care what race you are. White, black, German, African, Portuguese, Chinese, Japanese, you can become a citizen, vote, own property, and own a business in Hawaii in 1852. Now that's a decade prior to the US Civil War. What was the US Civil War about? A decade after the Hawaiian nation offered universal manhood suffrage, in America they're fighting about whether or not to own black people. That's a progressive nation. 1860s, we have one of the most literate nations in the world here in Hawaii. By the 1870s, you have 136 consulates, Hawaiian Kingdom consulates around the world. Yes? In 1854, you have Kauikeaouli declaring neutrality in the Crimean-Russian War, saying we're not going to choose sides, we're a neutral country. And the other country said, what's a neutral country? And they got together 4 years later and they came up with the laws about neutrality for international relations. That came from Hawaii. That came from Kauikeaouli's statement. Yeah? In 1890, Hui Kalai'aina pushed to change the Constitution to include voting for women. It didn't happen. They didn't have enough votes, but they pushed for it in 1890. In 1894, at the Republic's Constitutional Convention, women once again brought the want to vote to the convention. And they literally wrote in their notes at the state archives, they said, yeah, you're right, women should be able to vote, but we can't afford to do that here because there's 13 Native women for every one white woman. Yeah. Women didn't gain the vote under democracy in the United States until 1921, right? So that country, that nation that Kauikeaouli started and built and so forth, that Alexander Liholiho and Lot Kapuaiwa and Kauikeaouli and William Charles Linalilo kept going, was literally one of the most progressive modern nations in the world. Yeah, that's not the story we got. So let's talk about Kauikeaouli in particular. Okay. So, Kauikeaouli, Ke awiaweula ki wala'o o Kauikeaouli ka leo papa. Yeah? This was a birth chant printed for him in Tanupepa Kuakoa, 24 March 1865. O Hānau ka moku o kapu. Pa'a ia leva alani I ka lima akau o Wakea. Firm in the left hand of Wakea, right? So this chant went on, it was 300 lines. The chant went on and talked about his birth, yeah, and how important it was. Now let's start to... So where did he get his mana? Where did he get the right to rule? Yeah, we don't have a constitution yet. This allows us to talk about things like Kia Wahine and Keopuolani, right? I was taught there are 4 main deities in Hawaii. Ku, Kane, Lono, Kane, Loa. What does that leave out? The female Akua, yeah? We know Samuel Kamakau called Kamehameha I Ali'i Lepo Popolo. Yeah? We know his genealogy was, even with his Po'olua genealogy, it wasn't the highest. He's going to take over the nation, but when he dies, why are his children going to have the right to rule? Well, it's because he was smart and took Keopuolani, right? And her genealogy, her mo'okuaha, her deity, which included Pialani's line, which included Kiawahine. So Kiawahine, right? Kala'ahiana, daughter of Pialani, gives Kauikeaouli and Liholiho the right to rule. Right? 1821, Aho Kuhina, this council of chiefs gets together, and they've tested out this literacy the missionaries are bringing. It's been about a year now, and they decide, yes, this is good, and we want our first students to learn it. And they say, you're assigned to him, and you're assigned to him, and so forth. Kauikeaouli and his best buddy friend as a child was Timoteo Hatlelio. They're assigned to Mr. Brigham, yeah? And that's where they start to learn, and they become some of the first literate Native Hawaiians, Kanakauiwi. In the state archives, we have about 140-page handwritten minutes of the 1829 council that Kahumanu called together that started the first laws in Hawaii. And we don't know who wrote it, but it looks like it's probably going to be Hatlelio. Yeah? So, one of the first literate Hawaiians. On a June 6, 1825 ceremony, he's proclaimed Mōʻī, again, as I mentioned, as a kind of a restricted Mōʻī. upon the return of the body of his elder brother Liho Liho. 1832, Kauikeaouli comes of age at the death of Ka'ahumanu, insists upon his full rights of power, and does gain that full right of power. Now, that doesn't mean, remember, there still was a Kuhina Nui. There's a new Kuhina Nui posted, and they are going to co-sign on different laws and bills and so forth. But he is really kind of now taking his spot in the creation of the kingdom. So, Kūkulu Aupuni, building the nation. Again, 1830s. Remember that probably the most visible, probably the most important, the largest issue on everyone's mind is death from disease, right? Tens of thousands of Native Hawaiians dying from deaths of disease. We have Kauikeaouli, and there's many, many, many parts to his story that I'm not going to be able to get to because, again, you want to be here for just a few hours. But we do need to talk for a moment about that struggle where Kauikeaouli decides, yes, you've got your answer, Jehovah. And some folks are going to take that route, but we've been doing this for 2,000 years and it's worked. And so we're going to do this, and that is a Ni'aupio union, right? Between Nahiena and originally Liho Liho, but eventually Kauikeaouli. And so here in Lahaina, they start a project to make that happen, to create an akua with that Ni'aupio mating that will be strong enough to solve this problem they've never faced, which is mass death from disease. And so they start to build a pa'u for Nahiena. Those of you know, most of you probably know that most of the types of feathers were not allowed to women. They were capes, yeah. But they built this pa'u starting here in Lahaina. It was a 2-year project, and you have this pa'u created. I don't think I have a picture of it. Let me see. No. That's at the Bishop Museum today. It contains approximately 1 million o'o feathers. Now the o'o had 8 to 12 yellow feathers on its body. So who's good at math? I'm not. It's 150, 175,000 birds, right? This was a national project. This wasn't like, let's make her a cape. This was a national project to imbue. Now, in my mana'o, this is not fact, this is my mana'o, to imbue her ma'i. That's why it's a pa'u, right? Her ability to procreate, her ability to create this new akua, right? So they build, here in Lahaina, again, they build this pa'u. She does wear it a couple of times. She is with her brother, despite the fact that the missionaries have married her off to somebody else. She is with her brother. We know this for several reasons. One is because there are several accounts of it from ship captains' journals who say, yes, the king and his sister were so forth at the end of the day. Well, and he also, at one point, sends out a crier throughout town to announce what's going on. And you have to figure out why, yeah? Because he wants to make sure that when that child is born 9 months from now, people know it's his child. It's not the missionary husband's child, right? So they're, Nahiena and the Kauikeaouli are creating a new king. Nahiena does have a child September 17th, 1836. The child dies after a few hours. Nahiena dies 3 months later on December 30th, 1836. Kauikeaouli is heartbroken. He brings her body back to Haleʻaluhe, which is downtown Honolulu, kind of near Queens Hospital. And he won't give her up. He won't part with her. And so the papers are writing in every week saying, when's he going to bury her? When's he going to bury her? He has a funeral for her at Kawaiaha'o Church on February 4th. Another historiography moment. The English language newspaper that has her funeral has the funeral laid out, and it's led by Christian missionaries. And I was like, wow, they had that much power back then to lead the funeral of Nahiena Ana? So I go to the Hawaiian language newspaper, which was Kekumu, and it says, Kuhuna la'au lapa'au, Hawaiian warriors, blah, 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 and missionaries about 6th or 7th. So then I start to put context behind it and say, well, who published that newspaper, who published this newspaper, and so forth and so forth. The Kekumu, the Hawaiian language newspaper, was written by Reverend Reuben Tinker, who was the man who presided over the funeral of Nahiena. So anyway, that's another note about how these stories get mixed up. In April, Kauikeaouli buys a ship called the Kitote, a Spanish ship called the Kitote. He rechristens it the Harrieta Nahiena Ana. He creates a small armada of ships, and they sail over to Lahaina, Maui, to place Nahiena Ana's body near her mom. The pathway is written out in the Hawaiian language newspapers in the 1860s, and it talks about them arriving at Mala, cutting a path through the breadfruit forest, laying down ili, laying down lauhala mats, and burying her there, actually right about over here, yeah? And eventually at the Moku'ula, and eventually possibly the Christian church. Okay, so Kūkulu Aupuni, a path to save Hawaii's independence, Kumu Kanawai, a constitution. We need a constitution. So, Kumu Kanawai Lua Ehu 1840. Literally, on this property was where the first constitution for the Kingdom of Hawaii was created. Yeah? 1840. And again, a voluntary thing. It wasn't that the people rose up and demanded the king to do this. It wasn't that they rebelled and were going to cut his head off. He was smart enough, forethinking enough to create a constitution in 1840. Oh, okay. From absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy, we have an executive branch, we have a legislative branch, and we have a judicial branch. One more side note about history and progressivism in Hawaii and so forth. I saw on TV the other day the celebration in Honolulu of the first woman Supreme Court justice in America. And it was in 1980-something, 87 or something like that, 89 or something like that. And I was like, well, 140 years prior to that, Hawaii had a woman Supreme Court justice, right? Because in that judiciary that Kauikeaouli created, yeah, there was a woman Hawaiian Supreme Court justice, right? Women had power as governors, as Supreme Court justices, and so forth in the Kingdom of Hawaii in 1840. You could make the argument that women lost a lot of power with the coming of democracy to Hawaii. Petition against, okay, so this is an interesting piece. And I use it because it was shown to me 15 years ago by an unnamed kumu. And it was that, look. So this is a petition from Lahaina arguing against Haulian government. And it says, it's signed by, it just says at the bottom, 1,600 people, which, you know, maybe it was 1,600, maybe we don't know. We don't have the actual petition. But nonetheless, this is a petition from the people to the king saying, stop putting Haole in the government. And so I was taught, look, yeah, that's awesome. Hawaiians did this. They demanded no Haole in the government. But the king, Kauikeaouli, and the other kings, because of class, and because they wanted power, said, no, screw you. We're making it how we want to make it, and so forth. So I was kind of taught how this class system of the king versus the people happened. But the people, the Maka'ainana, were really the ones pushing for getting rid of the Haole. Now that's before we started to understand things like the Reverend William Richards resigned the mission to help Kauikeaouli, helped write the first constitution with William, and went around the world with Timoteo Ha'alileo to achieve Hawaiian recognition in 1843. So what this, Kauikeaouli receives this, writes back to the people and says, trust me, we need to do this. There are no lawyers in Hawaii. There are no international rights people and so forth in the 1830s. But we need to build a kingdom that will be recognized by the West. So he makes that argument to his people to trust me. Yeah? And he achieves this goal in 1843. A different way to look at that document. A path to save Hawaii's independence, Ho'omau Popo'ea, yeah? So we're looking for recognition. This is a kind of a drawing of Ha'alileo and Richards in London. They both leave. This is the original of the Mōʻī Kauikeaouli of the Hawaiian Kingdom to the King Louis Philippe of France in April of 1842. This is the actual diplomatic commission of Ha'alileo and Richards. So he writes the King of France and says, these two guys are the guys that have the power to negotiate for me. Yeah? An impossible mission, right? Now if you read Ha'alileo stuff, Kau'i Sai is the unquestioned expert on Ha'alileo in my mind. She's done 30 or 40 years of research on Ha'alileo. But the letters that come from him, they took a ship. Now, they had to keep this mission kind of quiet so that no one would kind of try to grab Hawaii before they achieved recognition. And so Ha'alileo and Richards take a ship down to Mazatlan, Mexico, and they cross Mexico by foot and by burro and by train for months. And he writes about, we swam across this river, and we went through this jungle, we did this, and so this Hawaiian and Reverend Richards cross Mexico and arrive in Veracruz, and then take a ship from Veracruz up to Washington, New York and then Washington, right? From there, they meet with the President of the United States, and who says basically, well, yeah, you know, I could do that, but I don't want to go out on a limb and make it official yet, so I'm not sure. So they leave Washington, they go to London, they go to Paris, and there in London they're able to secure recognition from the French and the English in that 1843 Anglo-French Declaration. Really, a truly amazing, amazing feat. Ha'alileo writes a letter back home to his mom who lives in Ko'olau, and it's a tear-jerking letter, and he says how I didn't want this mission. I wish it wouldn't have been asked of me because I'm not worthy of doing this, but I'm serving my nation as I think I should. I miss you. He hasn't seen his mom in 2 years. And he says, I can't wait to come back to your loving embrace. And unfortunately, he dies at sea on his way home. So the body of Ha'alilio arrives in Honolulu, and they bury him there at Pohukaina, on the palace, where the palace grounds are today. So Ha'alilio becomes the first Hawaiian diplomat, becomes kind of one of the first truly important folks we should all know about. Yeah? Here is the Anglo-French Declaration. I see it all the time called the Anglo-French Proclamation. There's a slight mistake in that. A proclamation is a singular monarch or something saying something. But when it's dual or several countries, it's a declaration. Just a small note. So the Anglo-French Declaration of 1843 at the Court of London, that's a picture of the original there. That's from the British Archives. Okay. Mission 2. So Kauikeaouli tells Ha'alilio also, so besides seeking recognition, I also want you to try to get us a kingdom seal. A seal for the kingdom, an official seal. Now these things were highly regulated. You couldn't just make one up. There was one place in the world that allowed you to do that, and that was the College of Arms in London. And they would make you a seal. And so Ha'alilio visits the College of Arms in London in 1843, tells them what he wants, and they create a seal for the Hawaiian Kingdom. So I'm going to show you a picture of the first Hawaiian seal. It's a little bit odd. Come on. So it looks kind of like what we see today. But first of all, the guys look kind of Irish. And the pu'olo, they're actually daisies. Yeah? They're actually flowers. But, they came close. So they give this to Ha'alilio. He takes it home, and Kauikeaouli says, no. But they use that to create the Hawaiian Kingdom seal 2 years later. It becomes the real seal. It's changed a couple more times later by Kalakaua and others. The men are facing out at one point and so forth. But this is the first. This is the original painting from 1844 from the College of Arms in London. It's at the State Archives. Oh, go back. Huh? Tell me. Okay. So, Hawaiian Kingdom, one of the most progressive, literate, engaged nations in the world. Let me show you how. 1852, Kumu Kanawai, universal manhood suffrage. We mentioned this. Yeah? How many now? We've been pushing for quite a while, and there's a bill passing through the legislature right now, not this moment, but in these last few days, to make La Kuakoa a state holiday. Yeah? And it's about awareness. And it's about awareness. It's about creating that new master narrative. It's about saying, well, when 200,000 kids go home from school, they're going to ask why. Well, because of La Kuakoa, and you tell them, and so forth, right? But the same thing with this. How many folks in the U.S., how many visitors do you think know that simple fact? In 1852, if a slave escaped from his master in Alabama, he could come to Hawaii and vote and own property and be a citizen. Yeah? Yeah? So these are the types of narratives that challenge that master narrative of, well, Hawaiians were this way and so forth. And it's internalized, yeah? It's not just folks talking about Hawaiians. Another quick little story. I lived in Pololo as a grad student with my daughter in a wonderful home, Mrs. Nobriga, half Hawaiian, half Portuguese. Wonderful lady. She rented us out a little room. And she got a tickle out of the fact this Haole kid in her house was studying Hawaiian stuff. She spoke fluent Hawaiian, or her parents spoke fluent Hawaiian, and she didn't speak a word. She was of that generation that you weren't supposed to speak Hawaiian and so forth. And so every time I come home, she'd ask me what was going on. I invited her to a PhD dissertation defense by a friend of mine, Kimo Armitage. He's Hawaiian, he's an author, published 17, 18 different books, an amazing author. And he was getting his PhD in literature, in English, I think. And so we come, and luau and kamakaku, everything's going great. I introduce them. He's very light-skinned, maybe even lighter than myself. And so later, I'm talking to her, and I said, Auntie, how about that guy? And she's, oh, that's one smart Haole boy. And I'm like, no, Auntie, he's Hawaiian. And she said to me, literally, she said, Hawaiian, get a PhD. And it wasn't, it was sad. She really was questioning, like, oh my God, a Hawaiian got a PhD? That comes from this, yeah? That comes from this. Those are the types of master narratives that we need to get these types of facts out to challenge. Okay? This is the proclamation in 1854 of neutrality in the Crimean War.
Be it known to all whom it may concern that we, Kamehameha III, King of the Hawaiian Islands, hereby proclaim our entire neutrality in the war now impending between the great maritime powers of Europe. A Hawaiian monarch, right? Started that discussion about what became international law on neutrality. The 1856 Declaration of Paris, an international agreement codifying the laws of neutrality, came out of developments made in the principles of international law on neutrality since the Hawaiian Kingdom's 1854 proclamation. Ho'ona'oau, education, right? The quote that I saw is in the back, a wonderful quote. E nā li'i a me nā maka'ainana, e Aupuni palapala ko'u, a o ke kanaka pono a na'oau, oia ko'u kanaka. Right? O chiefs and commoners, mine is a kingdom of literacy, and the righteous and learned man is my subject. This is from Kauikeaouli, early on, saying that's our path forward is education. Yeah? Lahainā Mission Seminary, 1831. In 1841, Ahahui Ini Namea Kahiko o Hawaii Ne was created, the first historical society in Hawaii. And it was created with the president of the organization was Kauikeaouli. He created a historical society. And Reverend Dibble and him met, and they talked about what they wanted and so forth. And they assigned some of these pupils to Mateo Ha'alilio, David Malo, Keone Ana, Samuel Manaikalani Kamakau, and Albert Moku. They assigned them, go out and gather stories from your kupuna. Go out and gather stories about this. Write them down, and so forth. And they assigned each one of them an essay, right? Ha'alilio had an essay on Kamehameha I. David Malo was to do Umi. Keone Ana was to do the arrival of the first haole in Hawaii. Kamakau was to do Kihapialani. And Moku was to do the first, come on, the Moku, come on. I can't even see that part of Lahaina. The first coming to Lahaina, right? So the first ship coming to Lahaina. So this society was not only to gather those facts, which started this kind of collection of oral histories into publication, but also was to train them as historians, right? To train them as historians. You see Samuel Manaiakalani Kamakau become one of the most famous historians, right? So Kauikeaouli didn't just say, I want a nation of literacy. He went out and made sure it was getting done. The Halipa'i, right, up at the museum, up at Lahaina Luna, January 1834, the Ramaj Press comes over from Honolulu. In 1834, we have the first printing of Hawaiian newspapers in Hawaii, up the hill at Lahaina Luna. These images come from the Bailey House Museum. I want to thank them. They were donated semi-recently, a full run of Kalama Hawaii, the first newspaper, and they're in great shape. So these are some of them, along with later newspapers like Nupepa Kuokoa with the flag and Ko'oia I'o. This one on my right, your left, was, as many of you know, the first printing of a color flag in any newspaper in the world. I mean, I could sit here for half an hour and tell you firsts that happened in Hawaii. And put that in perspective. I mean, we're here, but what if we were in Germany right now? And you're Hawaii, tiny little speck out in the Pacific. And this wasn't the King of France, the King of England, the Queen of Spain. This was a Hawaiian monarch that was the first to travel around the globe. This was a Hawaiian monarch who had electricity installed at the palace before the White House, and so forth and so forth and so forth. This was a group of Hawaiians, young Hawaiian men, who printed a flag in the newspaper in color that was the first color flag in any newspaper in the world, right? And they had to print, they made a little wood block of the red, and they'd press that, and the blue, and press that, and then they'd put the black stuff down and press that, and they did that 3,000 times. And they passed the newspaper around town. So that's the type of stuff, that's the type of innovation, that's the type of education that they're getting. Oh, go back one. Okay. You got Malo? Oh, no. Okay. A slide that I forgot to put in. I wanted to show you a couple of other things about education. In 1831, there was a new book on geography written by the most intelligent guy in geography in the world, and it was published in New York, and it became the new geography, how to study geography. That was translated into Hawaiian by one of the students at Lahaina Luna and used in 1834, 3 years later. And I read it, and I'm going, oh my God. I couldn't understand it. It's like, when you're standing at the prime meridian and looking towards Glasgow, Scotland, what is the blah, 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 blah? Hawaiian kids were doing this in 1834. Learning about the prime meridian, learning about this and so forth, right? David Malo printed an atlas, drew an atlas of the world in 1832, right? The education that existed in Hawaii at the time was far-reaching. Okay, Uahala, 15 December 1854, 11:45. I don't know why I've got a picture of a bicycle thing there. 1854, 11:45 a.m. at the palace. The high kalaunu were struck, the bells of the church were rung, and a 41-gun salute from the fort happened. So immediately afterwards, we see the reaction to his death, right? In the Kūkulu in the Privy Council, this is from 18 December 1854. It's decided that the days of mourning shall be 90 and not the traditional 30. Or 90 and not the traditional 30. Yeah? A letter of condolence. This is an original letter of condolence held at the State Archives of the U.S. President Franklin Pierce to Mōʻī Alexander Liholiho, giving his condolences for the death of Kauikeaouli, who he calls a just and righteous ruler. Yeah? This is from President Pierce. We've got dozens of these. I just picked out a few. This one is from Tsar Alexander II, it should be, of Russia, to Mōʻī Alexander Liholiho, giving his condolences, again, for the death of Kauikeaouli. This story is one that I so of all the condolences, of all the kind of honors that he was given, this is the one that kind of got me. And I want to read it to you. I wrote it down. It's from the newspaper from 19 February 1857. When the remains of our late beloved king, Kamehameha III, were deposited in the sepulchre, many were the sad mourners who watched night and day, lamenting and heartrending, wailing the death of their king, friend, and benefactor. Weeks wore on, and human grief was moderated, if not assuaged. The mourners quietly departed and returned to their homes and occupations. Not so for the late king's favorite mastiff. When the body was deposited in its last resting place, Evelina took his station outside the door of the tomb, the Kamehameha III's favorite dog. And there commenced his weary watch. For many weeks he would not leave the spot. After a time, food was not taken to him, and at last, driven by hunger and thirst, he was compelled to leave. But having satisfied these wants, he returned to his post, and has thus kept watch for nearly 2 years. Of late, his keepers have tried to confine him, but he is frequently missing, and if searched for, will be found guarding the mortal remains of him he loved so well. Yeah? So Kauikeauli's dog sat on the doorstep of his tomb for 2 years. Yeah. So that was a touching one. Memorials, remembrances. Yeah. Now, there's a great line in a book I was reading in a museum studies course I took that said memorials erase as much history as they create. Right? You place something somewhere, and it gets rid of that old whatever was there before. I'm writing a paper currently on the U.S. War Memorial, Arizona Memorial at Pearl Harbor, talking about how this very honorific, and I have great respect for the men who lost their lives there, but the creation of a U.S. War Memorial at Pearl Harbor eliminates everything that thing was before. The creation, what's the largest statue, memorial statue that we have in Hawaii, outside of the Kamehameha I statue? President William McKinley in downtown Honolulu. So we have a 40-foot bronze statue of President William McKinley in Honolulu. When Kauikeaouli died, they were trying to create a memorial for him. This is from the Polynesian, 1855. An association was created to honor the memory of Mōʻī Kauikeaouli. Prince Lot Kamehameha chosen as the president of the association. Nothing happens until 1864. A new push to create a memorial, a statue for Kauikeaouli comes out. Now, following the Constitution of 1864, is an appropriate time to honor him and what he left. The Constitution of 1852, a bronze equestrian statue set on a pedestal. And this was kind of funny. It says, cost would be $5,000 or $6,000. You know what the statue that cost them that they just put in Thomas Square Park? $250,000. Could have got a deal back then. They just put it up back then. $5,000 or $6,000. But it doesn't happen. Boom. Oh, there we go. Holiday, as a holiday. March 17th as a national holiday. So these were circulars that went out to all the consulates around the world. Remember, 136 consulates, or Hawaiian Kingdom consulates around the world, on every continent except Antarctica. We had consulates in South Africa, in Chile, in Detroit, Michigan, in San Diego, all over the world. And these things went out saying, I have the honor to inform you on the Monday, the 17th instant, being the anniversary of the birthday of Kamehameha III, will be observed as a national holiday. The Hawaiian flag will be displayed on all government buildings, and the usual salutes will be fired. This is informing the council. It's around the world. This is the 100th anniversary of Kauikeaouli's birth. They had a special memorial service at Kawaiahao Church attended by Her Majesty Queen Liliuokalani. They had a stone plaque made, that was covered by the Queen's High Kalaunu, her royal standard, and she unveiled the commemorative tablet. Oh, go back. Oh. Sorry, I'm stumbling with this. 1 second. There we go. Okay. Oh, come on. Boom. There we go. Fred Kahapula Beckley and Albert Ho'opili were the spear bearers representing Kame'ea Moku and Kamanava. Yeah. So Fred Beckley from Molokai and Albert Ho'opili were the spear bearers representing the twins. There's the actual memorial. Yeah. These are some photographs. I didn't do that, I promise. These are some actual photographs of bringing the memorial out to Kona. Yeah. Oh, that's not me. Okay, I'll do it by hand. Okay, wait, that one. And then there's them arriving with the tablet. Marching it. So this is 1914. Marching it. The man who built a nation. So, I'm going to Kauikeaouli. So I want to finish up, and hopefully we'll have time for questions, because that's the best part, because I can find out what you guys are interested in. But I want to finish up with that narrative of identity, right? And tie it into something that Anohea said, and that was this idea of finding similarities and finding justice and killing the message, not the messenger, right? Killing hate, not killing the hater, right? This statue was put in Thomas Square Park last year. These are kids from KS that are there. And for me, it claims space. Claims physical space on the landscape. When you go by there now, they're turning Kaka'ako into this whatever development and so forth. But you can't help but see that statue when you head down there, right? So it's claiming space there, and it's claiming space in people's minds, right? I was in Hilo a few weeks ago, and I was walking downtown, and I'm not encouraging folks to do this, this is graffiti, but on the electric box in downtown Hilo, there's a Kauikeaouli image somebody painted on the, and I had to stop, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Kalakaua, right? And it's just that idea of claiming space in the kids' minds, in the schools, on the walls. Every March 17th, there should be a celebration for Kauikeaouli in all the schools, yeah? Did you know that Eva School, did you know this, that to this day, Eva School celebrates Abraham Lincoln Day, and the kids write a song and say, we want to be just like you, yeah? Are there no Hawaiian heroes, right? So it's claiming space on that narrative. It's demanding to know the real history. So I encourage everyone to follow that example that Kauikeaouli set, right? Push for education. Push for an enlightened nation once again, right? Because the more we do that, it doesn't matter. To me, it's not a political move. It's a move about justice, about humanity. When you tell your story, and you tell your story, and you tell your story, that gives us context for us all to understand how we're going to create a world that we all want to live in, right? It's that engagement with history and the past, because our future is in our past, yeah? Mahalo.